Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Top 5 Things Fit Should Know About series. I am Jordan Jaggers, Chair of the Quad AI Fit Committee. In this session of our series, we will cover the top 5 things Fit should know about getting published in allergy and immunology. Our guest speaker is Dr. Michael Schatz. Dr. Schatz is in the Department of Allergy at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, where he has been caring for patients since 1977 and served as chief of the department for 11 years. Throughout his career, Dr. Schatz has been actively involved in clinical research and has authored 390 articles in the field of allergy and immunology. Dr. Schatz is a past president of the Quad AI and is the founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology in Practice. Welcome to Dr. Schatz, and thank you for leading this session. I will turn it over to you to get us started on your top 5 items.
Well, thank you very much, Jordan. It's a pleasure to talk about what certainly is one of my favorite subjects, which is getting published in Quad AI journals. And the 5 things I will get right into it. The first thing that I think you all would want to know is, what do journals look for in original research? In general, we want articles that have a clear, useful, and significant message. Easier said than done, but that is what we want. It should be presented and constructed in a logical manner, and the significance need to be grasped easily by everybody who looks at it. That's editors, reviewers, and readers. More specifically, what we judge a manuscript on are, first of all, importance, either in clinical practice, in a clinical journal, or disease mechanisms in something more mechanistic. We look for clarity of the presentation. We look at internal validity. In other words, are the associations made not due to bias or confounding or chance? We look for generalizability. Is this likely to be meaningful beyond the individual sample that's being studied? We look for novelty. Again, most journals want something that's a little bit new, not just confirmatory. And then even more specific, is the methodology appropriate? Is the discussion adequate? And the appropriateness of the conclusions. So that's what journals are looking for. Of course, it sounds like a lot, but it's certainly obviously doable. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that as you start writing the manuscript, how to use proper language. And again, that seems like it should be obvious, but I must say, we receive a lot of manuscripts that have a number of errors. And clear writing involves avoiding errors in several categories, and I'll just go through those. One set of errors occurs in sentence construction. Each sentence should convey one piece of information. You want to avoid overly long sentences. Shorter sentences are much easier to digest. To make it more interesting, vary the sentence construction, and using active voice will shorten and focus the sentences. So again, trying to look at each sentence in that way. And then tenses can be confusing and distracting if they're not what they should be. So you want to use present tense for known facts and hypotheses. So, for example, more than 25 million Americans have asthma. We want the present tense. On the other hand, you use the past tense for methods of the study. So we say we identified all patients with severe asthma from our asthma registry. That's identified. Sorry for the clinical noise in the background here. And then past tense also when you describe the results of the study. Patients with severe asthma had more comorbidities than other asthmatic patients. And again, a lot of details, but again, as a person is reading a manuscript, these really help in terms of understanding it. And then grammar. And again, these seem simple, but they're distracting if they're not correct. You want to make sure that the singular and plural forms of subjects and verbs match each other. That you do have complete sentences that have subjects and predicates, and also make up complete thoughts. And one of the other things that I think a particular mistake is when you're using a modifier, is it's hanging, I think that's what they call it, in the wrong place. So really make an effort to place modifiers as close as possible to the word they're modifying. Again, that will make that sentence much more understandable. And then finally, in these details, punctuation. And I guess the most common punctuation error that I see is where to put commas. And the general rule to keep in mind is that if you have two clauses, which means they have a subject and a verb, those should be separated by a comma. But if they're phrases, a group of words that don't have a subject and a verb, those would typically not be separated. And again, it may seem a little picky, but I think you can all think of sentences that make a different, they say something different depending on where that comma is. So, we have copy editors and they pick up most of these errors, but that's after the article's been accepted. And so it really helps in the review process to have these errors avoided. So that's number two. Number three, how to properly build the manuscript. So again, you've decided you have something worth publishing and you know how you're going to put it together sentence by sentence, but how to build the manuscript. And I think the key thing there is to keep in mind what the sections are, but that's not necessarily the order you're going to write the sections. So the general structure is, again, you probably know, it has a title, it has an abstract, there's the main text, which includes an introduction, methods, results, and discussion. There are figures and tables, acknowledgments, references, and supplementary data. But in terms of writing the main sections, a lot of people find, and I agree with this, that you actually want to write it in a different order. You may very well want to start with the data, that is the figures and tables. We'll say a little more about figures and tables, but they are typically your most important data. So you want to start there, and then write the methods, and then write the results. And then once you've got that down, you're in a better position to write the discussion and conclusions. And then actually at that point, you are in the best position to write the introduction. And I'm going to say a little more about what goes in each section, but this idea of building it that way. And then the abstract and title. So again, it may seem a little counterintuitive, but I think as you practice doing this, you'll see the value of getting some of the things not in the order it's presented, but writing it in that order. Just one other tip is that an outline, not surprising, can certainly help in the organization of the sections, especially the results and the discussion. I think benefit from an outline ahead of time. So those are three of the things that you should know. The fourth one is how to make sure each section fulfills its goal. I think all of these are important, but I guess really when I think of scientific writing, this one is probably the most important relative to getting the message across in a way that manuscripts are structured. So the abstract needs to concisely summarize the problem, the methods, the results, and the conclusions, and should clearly be able to provide the essence of the article without needing to read the whole article. And I think you all already are finding that you'll often just read the abstract. And so if the abstract doesn't really tell the story, that story is not going to get out there. Then the introduction needs to provide the context for the manuscript, clearly indicate the problem being addressed, and what the work is trying to accomplish in relationship to that problem. And people talk about trying to answer 5 W's in the introduction. Why is the research important? What's already known about the topic? What's not known, that is the gap. Why is it important to learn this information that this research addresses? And then what are the specific research aim that this paper addresses and the hypotheses? So abstract, introduction, and then the methods need to describe exactly how the problem was studied so it can be reproduced by others. At least that's one of the most important reasons for very specific methods. So it should include the details of the study design and timing, the sample acquisition and certainly inclusion and exclusion criteria, details of intervention if there is one, the data collection process, definitions of the dependent and independent variables, and again how they were collected, how they were obtained, and covariates as well, and then the details of the analyses. The results, these methods. Actually, I think we're talking about results here next to it. Yes. So for the results, that needs to tell a clear and easy to understand story. It should be pretty structured, and subheadings can be helpful. So in the results section, you want to have the participants, the details of the participants, that is, the number approached, the number enrolled, and the characteristics of the study sample. That is sort of typical table 1. And I'm sure you've seen and you'll see that typically the table 1 in a clinical study gives you the various relevant characteristics of the sample, and that's a very important place to start. Then you want to present the main findings from all of the evaluations described in the methods section, and including, of course, the results of statistical analyses. But you don't need to include all the findings. Some of the secondary data of secondary importance can be in the online repository. One of the arts, definitely, of a results section are the figures and tables. And these are critical because they are the most efficient way to present information. And the general rule is that these visual elements are used for the most important data. But 2 things to say about those. That number 1, it's important to keep in mind that figures and tables need to be able to stand on their own. So the captions and legends need to be detailed enough so that you don't really have to read the text to know what the figure is saying and to know what the table is saying. You do want to avoid duplication of results that's described in the text or other visual elements. We definitely see sometimes where people have a nice table that efficiently summarizes information, and then the results section goes through everything in that table, and that is definitely not necessary. And then finally, the discussion, which is where you interpret the results and what they mean in the context of prior information, and it's where you make practical recommendations. And there's really a pretty nice outline for that that most good papers follow, and I highly recommend. It starts with restating the rationale for the study. It doesn't have to go into everything that the introduction talked about, but at least restate the rationale. Then summarizing the important results of this study. Again, not repeating all the results, and that's a mistake that we sometimes see, that people really put too much results in the discussion, but you want to summarize the high points, then relate those current results to prior work, discuss the clinical and practical implications, then discuss the strength and limitations. And certainly every day, basically, we receive manuscripts that may remember to talk about the strengths, but they don't talk about the limitations. And it's important because all manuscripts have them, and it's very important. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't be published, but people need to interpret the information in terms of the limitations. And then the conclusions, and ideally, where to go from here, future studies that are needed. So those are 4 of the 5 things. And the last is how to submit an optimal revision. So again, we've talked about that initial manuscript, but almost no manuscripts are accepted without a revision. And like so much of this, there is an art to submitting a revision so that it's then likely to be accepted. So the way to do that is to consider and try to address every editor and reviewer comment really very conscientiously. And you will then submit a compelling response document where you include each comment, and then you include how you specifically addressed each comment in the manuscript. Or if a comment does not warrant being addressed, you explain why. So you don't absolutely have to feel like you have to make every change or do something in the manuscript with every comment, but if you're not going to, you have to explain why. And ideally, you'll cite the line numbers where you've addressed the comment, and for the most important ones, actually include text quotes. So that response document becomes extremely important. And then what you'll end up submitting is a marked manuscript, which, like track changes, is so that the editors and reviewers can easily see what changes were made, and then the clean manuscript that would be used for the final publication. So those are the 5 things, and there is a broader slide presentation that I think you'll have access to. I'm certainly open to any questions, and I think I would like to plug one other thing that as FITs I want to make sure you all know about, which is the FIT Faculty Reviewer Program. And it relates to what I'm talking about, because even though that's a mentored program where you review articles, and you work with a faculty member and review articles, but one way to really learn how to write an article is to learn how to review an article. They are obviously very much related. So yeah, I would encourage you to discuss with your faculty member the possibility of being involved in this program, and certainly contact the journal office if you have any questions. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And as I say, contact the journal office or me directly if you do have any questions. We certainly, at the beginning of your career here, I hope writing will be a big part of it. It certainly can be a very fulfilling and valuable experience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schatz. This was so insightful and thorough, going through the top 5 things regarding getting published in allergy and immunology. And I couldn't agree more regarding working as a reviewer, because I do think that it teaches you and adds on to your current skill set, which when really getting yourself to be a better writer, which I think is a goal of many of the FITs. So before signing off, I would like to thank Dr. Schatz again for volunteering his time. We appreciate the information and guidance you shared for the FITs. If you have any follow-up questions after viewing this session, please reach out to our FIT staff liaison, Mari at mduran@quadai.org. See you soon. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jordan.